On December 31st in Walker County, Alabama, while most families were waiting for the new year to begin, a 4-year-old boy disappeared. Not late at night, but while the day was still coming to an end. Johnathan was last seen playing near his father's home. No one saw him run after anyone, and there was no sign that anything was about to go wrong. More than 161 volunteers and 126 first responders joined the search, along with drones, K-9 units, and helicopters. But for a 4-year-old child, every passing hour became a race against time. 2 days later, his body was found in the woods, nearly 2 miles from where he went missing, a distance many found hard to believe, especially for a child so young. The family's dog was found alive near the body. It did not explain what happened, but its presence made the loss even harder to accept. Preliminary autopsy findings showed no signs of violence or assault. The cause of death was believed to be hypothermia, a deadly risk in cold outdoor conditions. One small detail stood out. Johnathan was reported to have removed his shoes. That alone can cause the body to lose heat much faster in the cold. Johnathan's father, Johnathan Boley, was later arrested on separate charges. Police stressed that those charges were not connected to the child's death. Why it matters. This was not a typical homicide case, but it shows how a delay of just a few hours can lead to a tragedy that cannot be undone. Before talking about the distance, before talking about the woods, we need to pause for a moment to talk about the child at the center of this story. His name was Johnathan Everett Boley. Family called him John, 4 years old. Family members described Johnathan as an energetic, curious child, the kind of child who always wanted to be outside, to explore the world around him. He loved playing outdoors, and he was very close to the family dog. At the time of the incident, Johnathan was in Alabama, staying with his father during a visit under a legal custody agreement. His mother lived in Florida. Based on confirmed information, this was not an unusual visit. There were no prior warnings, and there were no reports indicating serious family conflict at that time. And this is an important point to emphasize. Up until the moment Johnathan disappeared, there were no signs that a tragedy was about to occur. That is what makes this case so difficult for his family to accept. This video was created to recount the case of Johnathan Everett Boley based on publicly verified information. We believe stories like this deserve to be told carefully and responsibly. If you are interested in missing person cases presented with accuracy and respect for the victims, please consider subscribing to the channel to follow future reports. Now, let us return to that fateful New Year's Eve, December 31st. The morning and early afternoon passed like any other day. There were no reports of anything out of the ordinary. According to confirmed information, Johnathan Everett Boley was outside near his father's home, playing with his older brother, who was about 6 years old, and the family dog. This is an important detail that needs to be clear from the beginning. Johnathan was not alone when he went outside. He did not wander off by himself at the start. He was playing in a familiar area with a close family member. At some point, Johnathan moved out of the adult's line of sight. There is no evidence that he was called away. There is no confirmation that he ran after anyone. There are no signs of an argument or panic. According to reports, the older brother was the last person confirmed to have seen Johnathan Everett Boley. This does not imply blame. It simply establishes the last known moment when Johnathan was seen safe. In many child disappearance cases, the last seen moment is often very ordinary. No noise, no warning. And it is that very ordinariness that makes situations like this so dangerous. When Johnathan did not return after some time, the family began searching the surrounding area. But by then, daylight had already begun to fade. And for a 4-year-old child, every minute after sunset reduces the chances of being found safely. A call to police was made. From that moment, an ordinary afternoon officially became an emergency search. By the time the missing child call was placed, the sun was already close to the horizon. In child search cases, nightfall is always the worst-case scenario. Visibility is reduced to only a few feet of flashlight beam. Drones struggle to detect heat signatures as ambient temperatures drop quickly. K9 units also face greater difficulty as scent trails are dispersed by moisture and night air. As a result, a search may continue, but its effectiveness drops sharply after dark. And there is another factor that investigators find especially concerning. In cases involving lost children, the absence of early physical clues, such as a dropped shoe, clothing, or clear footprints, is often a bad sign. Because it means the direction of travel cannot be determined, the search area must be expanded. And time becomes divided, while a 4-year-old child has very little ability to withstand an unfamiliar environment. Local police responded to the scene quickly. The area around the home was searched first: the backyard, nearby paths, and open ground. There were no results. The search was expanded. Volunteer teams were mobilized. K9 units began tracking scent. Drones and helicopters swept the area from above while there was still enough daylight. But the terrain was not on their side. This was an area of dense woods, uneven ground, poorly defined paths, and small creeks that could become dangerous after dark. For a 4-year-old child, these conditions do more than cause disorientation. They drain energy and body heat very quickly. When night fell, temperatures continued to drop. And with every passing hour, the nature of the search changed completely. It was no longer about finding a lost child. It became finding a child alive. Search teams worked through the night. Flashlights swept across tree trunks and brush. Johnathan's name was called out into the darkness, but there was no response. No indication that he was nearby. By the next day, the scale of the search continued to grow. Hundreds of people took part, from law enforcement and rescue personnel to local residents who left their jobs to help. The number of searchers was large, but it is not always an advantage. More than 200 people were involved in the search. That may sound positive, but in real-world investigations, too many people can unintentionally disturb potential evidence. More people doesn't always mean better results. Hundreds of acres of woodland were searched. But what concerned investigators most was this: no clear clues were found, no shoes were located, no clothing was recovered, no personal items led directly to Johnathan's location. In searches like this, silence is often the worst sign. Because with every hour that passes, a young child's chances of survival in cold outdoor conditions decline without mercy. By that point, the search was no longer driven by hope. It was driven by time. And time, in cases like this, rarely stands on the family's side. At some point, the search quietly changed, from finding a child alive to finding answers. When the first night came to an end without any clear discoveries, the question became unavoidable. Was this still a case of a child who had wandered off, or had it become something more serious that no one wanted to name? In searches like this, there is always a very quiet moment. A moment when hope is still there, but time has begun to move in the opposite direction. On the second day, the search continued, but under a different kind of pressure. It was no longer just about finding a missing child. It became about finding answers, whether there was still time before the last remaining traces were erased. At this point, we want to hear your thoughts. In searches like this, what do you believe matters most? Time, terrain, or the lack of early clues? Please share your perspective below. Respectfully. January 2nd. After nearly 2 days of continuous searching, information came in from a remote, wooded area, a location that had been outside the initial search perimeter. There, search teams discovered the body of Johnathan Everett Boley. The location stunned many. The body was found nearly 2 miles from where he was last seen. Not along a main road, not near a residential area, but deep in the woods, in a section of terrain that was difficult to access. For a 4-year-old child, that distance is not easily explained by a single wrong turn. Near the location, the family's dog was found, still alive. Some volunteers later said the dog appeared to remain near that area. That detail spread quickly, and it deeply moved the community. But investigators were careful. They did not describe the dog as a guide. They did not put forward theories beyond what was actually observed. In the official record, this was simply a detail from the scene, not an explanation. Once the scene was secured, the question was no longer, "Where is Johnathan?" It became, "What happened during the time he was missing?" And the answer, according to investigators, could only come from one place: the medical examination. What the body tells us and what it does not. After the scene was secured, the central question was no longer where. It was, what caused a 4-year-old child to not survive those 2 days? In cases like this, emotion can spread quickly, but serious investigation always returns to one point: medical evidence. According to reports from local authorities and major news outlets, the body of Johnathan Everett Boley was found in an area with water, described as a creek, with information indicating that his body was partially submerged. That detail can easily lead people to a simple conclusion: drowning. But authorities made one important point clear: drowning is not suspected as the cause of death at this preliminary stage. Instead, the initial examination pointed in a different direction. In widely reported updates, officials stated that the preliminary autopsy found no signs of trauma and no indications of assault. In other words, no evidence of being beaten, no evidence of violence, no evidence of assault-type injuries. Based on those findings, the preliminary determination of the cause of death shifted toward environmental factors. According to information from local investigators and the coroner, hypothermia was identified as a possible or suspected cause of death in the preliminary report, with officials emphasizing that this is not yet a final conclusion. This point matters for viewers, because hypothermia is not like the loud causes people often think of, such as violence. It usually arrives in a much quieter way. In cold, damp conditions, especially at night, a child's body loses heat faster than an adult's. And when the body begins to lose heat, vital functions do not shut down all at once. They decline gradually. Fatigue, shivering, reduced awareness, disorientation, and eventually exhaustion. Another detail drew attention because it is very small, yet potentially significant. Sources reported that Johnathan Everett Boley had removed his shoes before he was found. Those hours were not recorded by cameras, had no witnesses, and cannot be fully reconstructed. That gap is one investigation cannot fill with assumptions. To understand what may have happened, this case has to be viewed through the lens of survival, not crime. For young children, orientation skills are not the same as an adult's. A 4-year-old child does not yet have a stable internal mental map. When disoriented, children often keep moving rather than stopping to wait for help. In a forest environment, following even a small cue, light filtering through trees, an open patch of ground, or the sound of running water, can lead a child farther than expected. Weather adds another layer. Nighttime temperatures drop quickly. Humidity remains high. A child's body loses heat faster than an adult's. Once hypothermia begins, the impact is not limited to feeling cold. It affects the ability to think, the ability to make decisions, and the ability to recognize danger. A small detail, such as removing shoes, can accelerate this process dramatically when combined with cold ground, wet soil, or water. And most importantly, hypothermia does not create a dramatic moment. It is not what movies often portray. It arrives quietly. This helps explain why a child can travel farther than expected, and why, by the time he was found, there was no opportunity to return. When these questions are placed side by side, one thing becomes clear. This is not a story about a single wrong decision. It is a chain of small factors: time, terrain, temperature, and the limits of a child's body coming together in the most unforgiving way. And that is why the case of Johnathan Everett Boley does not end with a verdict. It ends with a silence that is difficult to accept. After the body of Johnathan Everett Boley was found, the story did not end at the scene. It shifted to another focal point: the father. According to U.S. media reports, Johnathan's father, Jamison Kyle Boley, 40, was arrested on charges not directly related to his son's death. The reported charges included unlawful manufacture of a destructive device, chemical endangerment of a child. That information immediately triggered a strong public reaction, because to many people, the timing was striking. A child goes missing, then is found dead, and the father is arrested. But there is one point authorities emphasized clearly in their statements. Those charges have not been determined to be related to Johnathan's death. This is the most important boundary in this part of the story. A person can be arrested for a separate matter, but that does not automatically become evidence of a different cause of death. And in a case where preliminary findings show no signs of violence, combining unrelated events into a single narrative can mislead the public. Put simply, the public wants a culprit, but investigations must rely on what can be proven. And as of the time these details were released, the following had been confirmed. Johnathan disappeared while visiting his father in Alabama with his brother and the family dog. His body was found about 2 miles from the father's home. The dog was still alive. Preliminary findings point toward hypothermia and state that drowning is not suspected, with reports noting that his shoes were removed. The father was arrested on separate charges. Police emphasized there was no direct connection to the child's death. For that reason, this part of the story must be told in the most straightforward way possible. There are details that are shocking, and information that invites speculation. But the responsibility of credible reporting is to keep everything in its proper place. Facts stay with facts. When all of the known facts are set in order, when preliminary examinations show no signs of trauma or assault, when the reported cause of death is suspected hypothermia, the story still does not end with a final conclusion. Because as of the most recent updates, local authorities have stressed that any official conclusion remains dependent on additional testing, including toxicology, and that the final report is still pending. So what is it that continues to haunt so many people about this case? Because not every tragedy requires a perpetrator. Sometimes the most dangerous thing is the combination. Terrain, time, temperature, and the limits of a child's body. Nearly 2 miles in the woods may not look significant on a map, but for a 4-year-old child, it is a distance large enough for everything to change. Enough for the light to disappear. Enough for the body to become exhausted. Enough for the right choices to become difficult to make. And after the tragedy, the community responded in a very human way, not with speculation, but by sharing the loss. In Florida, where his family lives, prayer services and memorial gatherings were held for Johnathan Everett Boley. In local news reports, his mother publicly expressed gratitude to those who took part in the search and offered their support. And according to People, the funeral was scheduled for January 10th, 2026. A date that reminds viewers this is not just a news story, but a real family laying a 4-year-old child to rest. On the investigative side, the message has remained consistent. Preliminary examination. No signs of violence. The reported cause of death is suspected hypothermia, but it is not yet a final conclusion. Case files and findings will continue to be processed according to procedure. Some sources note they may be forwarded for further review. The story of Johnathan Everett Boley does not end with a verdict. It ends with a reminder. In the woods, in the cold, in the dark, time does not stand on the side of children. Sometimes, being delayed by just a few minutes is enough to lose every chance of coming home. Update. Jan 2026. Preliminary findings indicate hypothermia as a possible cause of death. The final medical examiner's report is still pending. This case does not leave behind a clear perpetrator, but it leaves behind very specific lessons. First, with young children, time is the deciding factor. In a forest environment, just a few minutes without supervision can allow a child to go farther than anyone expects. And once darkness falls, every mistake is magnified. Second, familiar terrain does not mean safe terrain. An area that feels close to home can become dangerous very quickly when light disappears, temperatures drop, and a child loses direction. Third, the absence of violence does not mean the absence of risk. Tragedies like this do not require a criminal act. They occur when small factors stack together in a short period of time. Johnathan's case does not teach us who to blame. It reminds us what must be done so that another story like this does not have to be told. If you have stayed with us this far, take a moment, just one quiet moment, to think about Johnathan Everett Boley. A 4-year-old child who never had the chance to grow up, never had the chance to make it home, and never had the chance to hear another New Year's wish. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told carefully, without sensationalism, without speculation, please consider subscribing to the channel to continue following real missing person and investigative cases. You may also leave a comment below to share your thoughts on how tragedies like this might be prevented in the future. We'll see you in the next story.